Thank you, Speaker.
Way up north.
Yeah, way up north. I'm very pleased to rise and speak on this programming motion, which allows us to move forward with sending the budget bill to committee while establishing firm timeframes for the establishment of a financial accountability office for the province of Ontario. The motion before us is a very important one, and I'm very pleased to offer my support for it because years from now, when we look back at our time in Queen's Park, there's a very obvious question that we will ask ourselves. What did we accomplish? And I think it's fair to say that much of the frustration of the first session of this Parliament was that there was the perception that we just sat for about a year and had very little to show for it. It's true that we passed a handful of bills, some of them very positive, but I don't think that there was anything that will stand out years or decades from now as establishing a firm vision. In many ways, the first session of this Parliament was a caretaker session. The motion before us ensures that the same label cannot be applied to this session, and I'm proud of what we've accomplished. What's important isn't what this motion is about, as it's roughly 1,800 words on paper, but it's about what the wheels that it sets in motion. It's about seeing a problem and taking a real and meaningful action to address the issue. For too long, we've heard about government scandals and poor spending decisions after they've happened. In fact, much of the first session and the current session of this Parliament have been focused on past decisions. It's true, things like Orange, e-health, and even the gas plants were very poor decisions to make, but the point is that up until this office is established, we're going to be constantly dealing with a post-mortem situation where the damage is already done and it can't be reversed. The money is gone and it's wasted. Well, I used a healthcare analogy a minute ago because it's fitting. As healthcare professionals will tell you, you can deal with the symptoms that arise after an issue happens at a much higher cost to the system, the individual, and society, or you can take preventative steps. Many of them as easy as educating yourself and others to prevent those problems from occurring in the first place. Preventative medicine. And that's what the Financial Accountability Office is. It's preventative medicine for our province's bottom line. An impartial office that will review the government spending plans before the check is written. Instead of learning about bad spending decisions months or even years after they've been made, when there's no chance to recoup that money, we have someone who can do it before to prevent expensive mistakes from happening. Because like it or not, whether you want to admit it or not, every government has made poor decisions, some inadvertent, while others leave you shaking your head wondering what they were thinking in the first place. Often it takes years for us to realize the full impact of the decisions that were made. Take, for instance, hydro prices, which is a very important issue in my riding because we're looking at a series of bad decisions that it would be very interesting to see what changes could have been made if an impartial arm of the government stood up and said, wait a minute, are you sure that this is a good idea? Because when it comes to electricity prices, we have a lot of people who want to lay blame with the Green Energy Act. And certainly it is an act that deserves a lot of blame, but it wasn't the first mistake that was made either. If you look at it, a big reason why our electricity system is in disarray is because in the late 1990s and early 2000s, the government of the day attempted to privatize the system, and this created a chain reaction of events that we should be regretting. For instance, the creation of 5 companies and agencies that now oversee the system. This creates a great deal of overlap and additional bureaucracy that adds tens of millions of dollars of cost each and every year. Part of that same process was forcing many municipalities to sell their utilities to the province. Some did, some didn't. And many of those communities did, though, and including some in my riding, who are now deeply regretting that decision because it probably cost them jobs as well. And then on top of that, we have the debt retirement charge that was created to, in theory, pay off a huge amount of debt in a short amount of time. And so we could right the ship for private investors. And that, of course, is a sore spot for many. Then the government was booted out, and we saw the current government come in, and they had their own plans. And many of those plans made the problem worse, such as the Green Energy Act, for instance, which in theory could be a very good piece of legislation, but the government was too eager and it started paying rates that were simply not sustainable, which in turn drove up prices again. The point is, what kind of a situation would we be in currently if we had something like a financial accountability office? An office that could impartially review the numbers and said, wait a minute, disbanding Ontario Hydro into 5 other agencies is going to drive prices up. Or forcing municipalities to sell off their utilities is going to add unneeded debt to the system and take vital decision-making powers out of their hands. Maybe some of those communities could have combated the downturn in the forest industry, where many of the problems we faced were the result of high hydro prices, and kept jobs in the community, but we'll never know. The point is to not rehash the poor decisions that have been made, but to look at why the Financial Accountability Office is so important. Because often governments get so focused on a single goal, such as promoting green energy or privatization, that they fail to look at the eventual repercussions, and this office provides us with that extra check, one that is independent and impartial. Because we're facing serious challenges in Ontario today, and we need to ensure that the decisions that we're making work not only in the short term, but in the long term as well. For instance, there are proposals out there today about privatizing certain revenue-generating arms of the government, such as the LCBO and Ontario Lotteries, and I believe that the people bringing forward these concerns, these issues, are focused far too much on the short-term benefit, a huge influx of cash that will help in the short term. But what about the long term, when billions of dollars of dividends that these organizations pay are no longer coming into the provincial coffers? What will we do then? Would we have to reduce services, raise taxes, maybe privatize other portions of the government? We can speculate, or we can have an independent office of this legislature review those plans and give us a pretty effective preview. It's worked federally, particularly when it came to the cost overruns of the F-35 program, and I believe very strongly that it will work provincially, and it will help ensure that we are being responsible to the taxpayers who sent us here. Sometimes the well-intentioned people in charge of making these costly decisions forget that it isn't the government's money they're spending, it's the taxpayers' money. And we have an obligation to ensure that that money is spent well and it's spent wisely. We could go even as far as the gas plant scandal, which has dominated our agenda since we returned in February. What would have happened if before the decisions were made and the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed, if the Financial Accountability Officer had performed projections and had come out and said that the actual cost of cancelling the plants in Mississauga or Oakville would be $500 million or more, because there were calls to cancel the plant before the election. Would that have changed the way that the campaign played out? Would that have maybe prevented the cancellation from happening? I mean, we can't say for certain now because it's already done, the money's been spent, but instead of it being a hot-button issue in one community, I'm pretty sure there would have been province-wide attention and province-wide repercussions if someone said, well, it's going to cost this amount of money, but we're going to do it anyway. Because we didn't hear about the gas plants in the north during the campaign, and I'm sure it's fair to say that many of the 107 ridings didn't hear about them during the 2011 election. And I have a feeling that if we had known the cost and what the cost would be, that maybe we'd be looking at a completely different result, or money that would not have been spent. And that's why we should be very proud of what we're about to accomplish with the creation of the Financial Accountability Office. And while the office has been effective federally, we can make it even better in Ontario, because we're aware of some of the shortcomings of the federal version. So I'd like, if I could, to look at some of the roles and responsibilities that this Financial Accountability Office will have in Ontario. As I've said, the Financial Accountability Office will operate independently and impartially and have powers similar to the Information and Privacy Commissioner to order the release of documents, which will help ensure that the office has the information it needs to put together future realistic projections. Like the Ombudsman Office, The Financial Accountability Office will report directly to the legislature, and MPPs can request assessments from the office if they're concerned with a particular department, agency, or spending program. The office will be able to monitor spending and revenue at government departments, crown corporations, and agencies, meaning that they would be able to provide us with very good assessment of the long-term implications of privatizing an agency like the LCBO, OLG, or even Service Ontario. The office will also be able to examine the costs and the outcomes of proposed legislation, even private members' bills, which should provide us with some very valuable insight as we enter into these discussions. So in other words, this office will have some pretty broad and significant powers to examine government spending, and that is what we need in Ontario, and right across Canada for that matter. Because it's no secret that people have become cynical. It seems like every time they turn around, one level of government or another level of government is involved in a spending scandal. And I understand that frustration because I hear about it from my constituents. But rather than repeat the cycle of replacing one scandal-plagued government with another government that will end up being plagued with scandals of its own, isn't it better to do something that will actually get to the root of the problem? Rather than sit and point fingers, and we see this all the time in question period where a member of the opposition will ask a question and a minister of the government will respond with, well, your government did this and the government before it did that. If there was a system that could be put in place that would prevent money from being misspent, shouldn't we do that? Because we're not talking about Mickey Mouse agencies. We're talking about departments and organizations that are well respected and will be listened to. For instance, if the Environmental Commissioner of Ontario says something, people take notice. If he points out how policy is failing to achieve desired results, then there's a good chance that something will change. Similarly, if the Auditor General speaks up, all of the legislators in this House, the media, and the people of the province listen. If the Ombudsman of this province singles out a problem, the government listens, as do the people of Ontario, the opposition, the media, and anybody else who might be affected. And the reason for this is because all of these offices are impartial, and they have been created to act as a watchdog for issues that we believe need to be respected. And I believe we need to respect our taxpayers, our hardworking families, and that we need to raise the bar of accountability. And really, we have to do that. If we ever want voter turnout and voter participation to increase, this is something that we have to do. The creation of a financial accountability office will do that, and it will help to ensure that we do not continue to make the same mistakes over and over again. It ensures that government proposals and even MPP private members' bills are properly costed out before they are adopted to prevent waste. The worst thing that we can do in the face of scandals like eHealth, Orange, and the gas plants is to do nothing. That is the most irresponsible thing that we could do. So instead of pointing fingers and trying to score political points, I think we really need to take a step back and ask ourselves what we can do to ensure that scandals like this do not happen again. Because governments of all stripes have a long track record that suggests that if all we do is replace one party with another party, we're not actually going to get the results that we need. And Speaker, I'm very proud to say that the Office of the Financial Accountability Officer is what we need to do to achieve the results that we need. It's very easy to talk the talk about accountability and respect for taxpayers, but now it is time to walk the walk. And that's why I'm very proud to stand here today and to say to the people of my riding and everyone else across Ontario that we are hearing your concerns about government waste and improper spending, and we're going to do something meaningful about it. Thank you.